Hi guys, Ricky Pope here, and this week on the Christian Nerds Unite podcast, I talk with Eric Nevins about podcasting and the Christian Podcaster Association, plus scripture and nerdy news, and we'll get to all of that right after this.
Hey nerds, this is David with Tatooine Sons, a pop culture podcast. We believe that pop culture is the mythology of our generation. There is a story, it is written on our souls, and that all of these myths speak to that story. And that is why every Tuesday I talk about Star Wars and Marvel and DC and Lord of the Rings and whatever nerdy things we can think of with my two sons, Sam and Nate. It is a 30 to 45 minute celebration of all the weirdness that we love so much. Basically, Mom said we couldn't talk about it at the kitchen table anymore, so we decided to start a podcast. We hope you'll check it out. It's on every podcast app out there. Tatooine Sons, that's Tatooine S-O-N-S.
Thanks so much for joining me this week. We are excited to be part of the Christian Nerd HQ podcast network. You just heard from Tatooine Sons, Dad and his two boys talking about pop culture. Along with them and Christian Nerds Unite, we're also joined by Fangirling Over Jesus, who does a great nerdy devotional, and the Reverend and the Reprobate, who interview people they have no business interviewing, and the Speaking Nerdy podcast, where two good friends talk about all things nerdy. Make sure you go to ChristianNerdHQ.com to follow all the podcasts and check out the Christian Nerd HQ YouTube channel for exclusive content we're making together. Let's start with some scripture. Let's read Acts 13, 2-5. While they were worshiping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, "Set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them." So after they had fasted and prayed, they placed their hands on them and sent them off. The two of them, sent on their way by the Holy Spirit, went down to Seleucia and sailed from there to Cyprus. When they arrived at Salamis, they proclaimed the word of God in the Jewish synagogues. John was there with them as their helper. So Saul, also called Paul, and Barnabas were sent out to preach the gospel of Jesus. We're all called in the Great Commission to share the gospel. This weekend, I had the honor of speaking to a group of ministry leaders from several parts of the world. I was on a Zoom call with them while they were all in a conference center in an Asian country. I was sharing how our Finding God Online ministry helps indigenous believers in hard countries find seekers online and then coach them to meet face-to-face. Some statistics say that there are 4.9 billion people using some form of social media around the world, and the fastest growing populations on social media are in non-Western countries, making social media the largest mission field in the world. It can be an amazing tool for reaching those who are searching for something in their lives. I've seen God moving in amazing ways through the use of media in hard-to-reach countries. I pray that you will ask God how you can be used to reach people with the gospel through things like social media. Now for some nerdy news. Disney announced on May 10th that it would be removing some content from both Disney Plus and Hulu. Recent reports are saying that this content will be removed on or around May 26th. This should allow Disney to get some tax breaks for losses. While most of the content is documentary-style shows or behind-the-scenes or competition-like shows, things like The World According to Jeff Goldblum, Marvel's Project Hero, or Be Our Chef, some are more substantial scripted series and movies like 2020's Black Beauty and the Willow series that's only 6 months old. Some reports say that there are around 100 titles that will be removed. Disney has also announced that they will be closing Star Wars Galactic Cruiser Hotel at Disney World. Galactic Cruiser has won awards for outstanding achievement in themed entertainment and received some of the highest guest ratings ever. But with prices as high as $6,000 for a family for the 48-hour stay, many have criticized it as too expensive. In a statement, Disney said, "This premium boutique experience gave us the opportunity to try new things on a smaller scale of only 100 rooms. And as we prepare for its final voyage, we will take what we've learned to create future experiences that can reach more of our guests and fans." With the custom built hotel and view screens instead of windows for the immersive experience, it's unclear how they will repurpose the property or if they even can. The last voyage of the Galactic Cruiser will take place September 28th through 30th of this year. Fast 10 finally knocks Chris Pratt out of the #1 spot at the box office this weekend. With $67 million domestically and over $318 million globally. Reviews are split with a 54% critic score and an audience score of 87%. Vin Diesel is joined once again by Michelle Rodriguez, Tyrese Gibson, John Cena, Jason Stamos, and Ludacris. New to the franchise are Jason Momoa and Brie Larson. Most audience reviews I have read say don't expect an amazing storyline, but do expect some amazing cars, spectacular effects, and some unbelievable stunts. Now let's get into our interview with Eric Nevins from the Christian Podcasters Association. Eric Nevins, it is great to have you today.
Ricky, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you are involved in podcasting, and you've been doing this for quite some time. You actually are a podcaster and a coach for podcasters. Tell us a little bit about that. You know, how did all this start, and what got you into this, and why are you doing it?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a long story, but I'll give you the short version. Definitely podcasting was not something that was on my radar. I actually wanted to be a pastor originally and went to school. So I did, I crammed a 3-year degree into 9 years to get my Master of Divinity. Long story. But when I finished, I had the beautiful fortuitous timing of graduating during the downturn, from 2008, like in the Great Recession.
Mm.
So, I just never really ended up, some of the jobs that were there that I could have gotten or would have wanted to get weren't there anymore. And so I ended up staying in corporate America. Worked at I call it bank jail, because I would go to work and I would sit in my 6x6 cube and not come out until somebody told me I was allowed to have lunch or something, And during that time, I discovered podcasting. I switched jobs from working in a call center, listening, waiting for a phone call to come in, to actually a job where I had to work for a living, where I had to click buttons and bounce people's checks, which leaves a little scar in your soul when your job is just to ruin people's day a little bit. That was what I did. But in order to entertain myself, I put in my earbuds, right, and started to listen. And I found podcasting, and I listened to a ton of for me, they were the luminaries, right? People like, Amy Porterfield and Michael Hyatt and Cliff Ravenscraft and John Lee Dumas and Serial and like all those things.
The big names.
Yeah. Back in 2013, 14, all those people, I started listening to them and I started realizing, hey, I could do this. And one night I was doing some overtime and I was talking to this guy on the phone, and he goes, "You got a great voice. You should be on the radio." I was like, yeah, well, I don't know how to do that. Right. But it inspired this thought that maybe I could have a podcast. And so I started thinking about it. What could that do? How could I actually pursue this? And then as it developed, because I still cared, I went to my emphasis in seminary. I got a Master of Divinity with an emphasis in Christian formation. And so I started asking myself the question, how can I actually be developing that and contributing to that conversation still? And podcasting seemed like a great way to do that. So I started a show called Halfway There in 2016, all about the Christian spiritual journey, kind of the ups and the downs, the things we go through that we never really talk about. When I was a kid, the story was always my life was terrible, then I met Jesus, now my life is great, right?
Yeah.
Which is awesome, except for all the other things that happen in life. And I think it's also
yes,
it's also attested not only in Scripture but among God's people for the last 2,000 years. And so I wanted to tell that story, and that's what I get people to do. So that's kind of how I got into podcasting.
Okay.
I became a podcasting coach. I always kind of wanted to be a coach, but I started a group of Christian podcasters, which you're part of, Christian Podcasters Association, in 2017. Then it kind of grew, and a couple years later, I was like, I need to do something with this. Started a membership in 2020, and now it's just kind of become my business. It's the thing that I do.
Very cool. So when you were listening to podcasts and you started getting interested in this idea, what is it that actually attracted you to podcasts particularly versus any other form of listening? You could have been listening to the radio, could have been listening to music. What was it about podcasts that intrigued you?
Well, I love the content. I love the new content, right? It was stuff that I'd never heard before. Things that I can learn. Now, I did do other things like audiobooks. I would sit, because I literally had 40 hours a week, right? Just sitting there basically trying to entertain myself. So I would listen to entire biographies of like George Washington or somebody, 40 hours of audio, and I would kill it in a week and a half because I couldn't listen all 40 hours. So there was a lot of that, but I love the information. I think there was something else that happened too. What I found out is a lot of those people, not all of them, right? But a number of them were actually believers as well. And some of the principles they were talking about, serve your audience first, right? Serve before you ask for something back. I found just to be really consistent with a Christ-like value. And that really intrigued me. That made me go, wow, this is maybe something that I could do. I think I've always had a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit as well. And so I thought, as a pastor, that's a good thing, right? You start things and do whatever. But that was sort of dormant for a while. And so also they were inspiring me to call this piece of myself out that I just hadn't had a chance to express. So I think it was a lot of that.
So you kind of had an idea for a topic, but if someone out there is considering a podcast, what kind of things should they think through, work through to figure out what topic is good for a possible podcast? Why they should choose that particular one? What kind of thought process should somebody go through?
Yeah. Well, there's a few questions you can ask yourself. I think one is, what are you interested in? What do you really love talking about that you can never stop talking about, right? Because you're going to make a lot of content if you start a podcast, and you need to be able to talk about it. Also, part of that, by the way, is being able to repeat yourself, being willing to repeat yourself, right? About your topic. I think that's maybe neglected as a skill. Sometimes we think, oh, well, I've said that. No, man, like the way this works is you just say the thing over and over and over again until people get it, right? That's just that's called leadership. That's just the way that it goes. Anyway.
Isn't that what pastors do?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. It's just
we preach the same sermons multiple times in slightly different ways.
Right. Marketing is all works the same. So ask yourself that question. I would ask yourself the question, what do people come to you for that maybe you keep finding people asking you questions about? Podcasting is a great tool for that, to answer those questions in a way that they can connect. So that's one option. And then I would say, I would also ask yourself, like, what is the change that you want to see in the world? Like, what is the conversation that you really want to contribute to? So for me, that was spiritual formation, the Christian spiritual journey. How do we change how we talk about our stories? But I have another show, The Christian Podcaster, where I'm contributing to like how do I inspire people to start podcasts, right? How do I inspire them to grow their show? How do I inspire them to join the things that I'm doing so that I can help them? So there's lots of questions like that, but those are the ones that I would start with. And then you can always ask your friends, like, what if I started a podcast, what would it be about? You can dial in your message. There's a whole lot to that, but start there.
Very cool. And when you're getting started, what are some things you need to kind of have in line before you start a podcast?
Okay, so I have this kind of framework that is kind of the steps of building your podcast, and it's because I went to seminary. I'm contractually obligated to alliterate them, so they all start with M. So it's mindset first is the thing that you have to show up with. You have to understand. I think there's a couple things. Some of these things are, I think, biblical principles, like you know, just following what God's asked you to do, and there's some other things in there, but you have to be committed to showing up and doing the work for the podcast, and doing it even when it seems hard, and even when you don't get the results that you're wanting, right? So a lot of podcasters find this, particularly if you don't already have an audience. Somebody like I don't know, Joe Rogan or some of the people in the like top echelon, right? They already had audiences. The reason they're there is because they built audiences on other platforms, like TV or other places, right, for a long time. So don't expect that. But if it's hard, you need to have a mindset that you're going to just keep doing it. So one of the key questions I had to answer early on in my podcasting journey was, am I going to show up? Am I going to do seasons and give myself a reason to take a break? Or am I going to show up every week and just keep producing? And I know it was Cliff Ravenscraft who said the best way to grow a podcast is to show up week after week after week after week, same day, same time, and just keep publishing. So I committed to doing that. That meant a lot of late Sunday nights because I had a Monday episode that I wanted to get out, but I did it. And that was a key mindset shift for me. Okay, so the second one is message. And we've talked about this a little bit when you're trying to figure out what you want to say, but you have to have a transformation that you're promising the audience. And if you do that, it does a couple things. One, it settles something for yourself that you know that you're offering something of value and that it's worth showing up for, even if your audience isn't as big as you'd like. So I think that's really powerful, but it also attracts people who want the thing that you're offering, right? It helps you clarify who you're going to talk to, and maybe even how you're going to speak to them, right? So like there's a lot of things in there that can work. So then I got the other parts of it, but it's like, so it's mechanics, which is all the stuff we think about, like our microphones and hosting and all that jazz, and then marketing, and the monetization, which is the thing everybody wants to start with, but it's at the end of the road, right? So you got to get all these other things down so that you can actually build that.
Are there some tactics that new podcasters should know or learn? Maybe things that they don't naturally have.
Well, the first thing I would think about is a microphone, right? Is microphone technique. So a lot of people don't know how to use a microphone, and you have to learn it. Neither did I, right? When I first, neither did you. So we had to figure it out. So like if you want, like mine, and I think yours probably too, we're both speaking sort of past our microphones, not like right into it, because then you get something very different. We're close enough to it that it picks it up.
Yes,
exactly,
I understand exactly what you mean.
Exactly. There's a way to do that. So I would say learn your microphone technique, speak past it, let it pick you up. But then as you're speaking that way, it doesn't catch all your plosives, they're called, right? So I think that's one good thing to do. I think as far as other skills, I think you should learn how to edit. And I think your first 50 or 100 episodes, you should edit yourself just to kind of get to know yourself a little bit as you listen. I think that's a good thing. I think you should learn a little bit of marketing and copywriting to learn how to start with a problem that your audience is experiencing, how to demonstrate to them that there's some stakes to this problem and why they need to have that resolved, and then let your episodes give them a solution. So there's a lot of skills, but they all kind of take a little bit of a time to develop.
Gotcha. What about scripting? You kind of alluded that I use the term scripting.
Yeah.
Is that something that every podcaster should do? Is there a minimal amount of scripting you should do? Or is it better to, do something more robust? What are your ideas and thoughts about scripting?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so the answer is maybe. So it all depends on your show. So what we're really talking about is format, right? So what's your format going to be?
Mhm.
And so I'll give you an example of my show, and then I'll give you some other examples. So my podcast, Halfway There, I don't script very heavily, but somebody said, a friend you know, Tim Winders, said to me not too long ago that he listened to my show and he realized, like, across years, right, episodes,
Mhm.
that my open is always basically the same, and it has been for a really long time, right? Well, that's
Yeah.
because I have that scripted, so I know what I'm gonna say. Welcome to Halfway There. This is the show where we have honest conversations with ordinary Christians about today's Christian experience. I'm your host, Eric Nevins. Okay, so now you know what the show's about, you know what it's called, and you know who I am, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm going to I have a kind of a spiel about things you can do, right? A little call to action. And then I bring in my guests and I do all that within 60 seconds. Well, that is good because it helps my audience know, if you're here for the first time, you know who I am, you know what's going on. If you're, it's also familiar if you're a regular listener. And I don't think you can
Mhm.
underestimate how valuable that is.
Yeah.
And then you go into your content. So some things I think should be scripted like that. I think at the end, I don't have a script per se, but I do have some things that I say. Go visit my guest's website. Check out halfwaytherepodcast.com. And like, I've got those things. In between, though, should it be scripted? Well, that's all depends on what you're doing. If you're having we can talk about, if you want, if you're doing an interview, how to prepare for that interview. There's a couple ways to do that. If you were I never liked just doing sermons, like just from a script. I'm not very good at reading those. So I prefer bullet points. And so I do it that way, but it all depends on your style, depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So there's a lot to get into that.
So, because you and I are friends and I follow you on social media, I saw you make a comment about how much harder it is than you realized it was to do solo podcasts.
Yeah.
Just you talking into a mic, or talking into a mic and a camera versus a interview style.
Yep.
Talk to me a little bit about those two different things. Why would one or the other be preferred? Not necessarily your preference, but why should somebody consider both before they make a decision on what kind of podcast they really want to make?
Yeah. So I'm not sure that it is harder necessarily. I think it was for me, right? I think I'm practiced at doing interviews. I've done 340 interviews for my show. I did a bunch of interviews for Podcast Magazine. I've done some other interviews for the Christian Podcaster. So maybe, let's say, close to 400 interviews. I could do those, right? Like, I know how to do those now. But when it came to doing, I posted that because when it comes to doing like a solo episode, I'm just starting to do some of those for the Christian Podcaster, because my sort of 5 pillars, right? My 5 steps, I'm trying to get that out. I want people to hear that. I want it to help. And so I'm trying to do this practice. I want people to see me as like, oh, Eric knows what he's talking about with this stuff. So I started creating episodes, and I did one and I listened to it the next week or like later. And I was like, I don't like this at all. This is not good. It's not great. I was going to re-record it. I came back to it a couple weeks later. I listened to it. It wasn't that bad, right? It was fine. It's just in that moment, I didn't enjoy it. So I actually published it yesterday, and guess what happened? 2 people responded to the email. Somebody posted in the Facebook group, Eric, thanks for publishing that. It was really helpful. Can't wait to hear as you elaborate on each of those 5 things in the episode. So that is like, it was harder, I think, mentally for me, right? It was harder for me to go, I'm speaking, I got to bring, the thing. What's my kind of attitude toward my listener and that kind of thing. I think it was just a little bit, it was unique for me. Either way, though, I think one of the best tips that I've ever gotten is from a guy named Tim. His name was Tim. He is a kind of radio legend in Denver here where I live. And he told me, what you got to do is you got to have an empty chair in your office or in your studio, and imagine your listener sitting there, right? And so then you're talking to them. And this works on interviews as well as solo shows. So what I do when I'm like interviewing somebody is I will imagine that my avatar, my person that I'm talking to is in that chair. And occasionally you'll hear on halfway there, I'll start to direct something toward them. So they'll say, hey, did you hear that? Like, check this out. You should be doing this. Look for mentors or whatever the thing is I'm talking about. So anyway, that's my thoughts on it.
Okay. Well, and as far as interviews, how do you prep for something like that?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to prep for an interview. And I do it both ways. So for halfway there, I know what I want to get out of that conversation, which is basically I want to go through somebody's spiritual journey, their events with the Lord, moments that they questioned him or came to faith initially, people who mentored them, things like that. So I'm going to ask those kind of questions. I've got kind of a template that I'm going to ask. And so I don't ask the same questions the same way every time, but I'm going to just kind of go walk through their journey in that way. So I do very little preparation for that. I kind of know who they are. If they got a book or something, I'll look at it. But I'm not doing a ton. Now with the Christian podcaster, I take the other approach, which is I script about 7 to 10 questions. It's only 30 minutes, but I try to have some questions so that I know the direction of the episode and I know where I want to go and I know what the audience is going to get. So I even write a purpose statement for that episode so that I know at the end, like I did one this week with a guy named Chris Granger who has a membership for men. And I said on there, but at the end, listeners they'll be inspired to start their own community for their podcast audiences. That's what I wanted. So I think being intentional about it like that, and that you don't show up and just kind of ramble and do that. Follow curiosity for sure. Did you know Larry King never prepared for any interview? He would just show up and like ask some questions. The only time that got him in trouble was with Jerry Seinfeld when he was like, Larry King suggested that Seinfeld went off the air because it got canceled. And Jerry Seinfeld was a little bit incredulous about that. And I don't blame him. So it can burn you, right? But prepare at least a little bit and then be open enough to follow curiosity, I think is helpful as well.
Very cool. Well, how would somebody learn more about podcasting? You know, if they were like, you know, I'm interested in this, I'm not sure it's for me. What should they do to kind of feel that out?
Well, so the first thing I'm going to say is you should listen to a bunch of podcasts. Go check out a bunch. Like take a topic that you're interested in and search that in Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you go and listen to just one episode of like 7 different shows. Pick a bunch because you're going to get some observations about format, style, things that you like. My style came about because there were some people that I listened to, but then they had other people on their show and I started listening to their show and I kind of pieced it all together from all these people that resonate with me. Right. So check that out. And that'll give you an idea and start to imagine, ask yourself, could I do this? Could I do that? What would that look like? Because you can find that joy and that kind of piece of you that you bring to your show. That is what is going to keep you going. Right. That's what's going to really be connecting to an audience. People will feel that. They'll hear it in your voice and they'll enjoy it. So definitely do that. I think also, there's lots you can find at like ChristianPodcasterAssociation.com. I've got a lot of tools and things for that there as well.
And then when we're talking about, you mentioned that you don't like just trying to like read a sermon on a podcast, but in your podcasts, you are, sharing the gospel in a different format. Why do you think that is? Why did you choose to do it that way? And do you feel like that is a better way, or do you think that is something that, why did you choose? I guess the question is, why did you choose to do it that way rather than just making a gospel presentation?
Oh boy, there's a whole story to this, Ricky. So
go ahead.
All right. So I was a terrible preacher. I do not enjoy actually telling people what to do. Right. So that was already on my radar. But right after I graduated school, I started a political blog about Christians and politics. Quickly figured out I don't have much to say about that. I have no authority. I'm not in that world. I just thought I wanted to pop off about some things. Well, while I was doing that, I discovered that publishers will send you books for review, right? If you're a blogger, because this was when blogging was really big. I'm sure they still do. But so I asked for a couple. One of them, by the way, is a book by Mike Sayers, who's a pastor here in Denver. Started a church. It's called Pure Scum. He started a church called Scum of the Earth in Denver. Like, it's amazing. Great stuff. Anyway, check that out. But the second one I got was by Os Guinness, a book called A Free People's Suicide. Now, this is sort of political, philosophical, kind of stuff, not like some of his other kinds of works, although he does write on that. But what he convinced me of is toward the end of the book, he starts talking about character and how character really needs is kind of the key component, particularly in the United States, or maybe anywhere, but in the United States where we have a democracy or republic. It only matters, right, what's written in the Constitution or your laws, so long as people are willing to enforce it, right? So long as the character to be bound by what's in the law. That is what matters. Okay, so this got me thinking. I started asking myself the question, how do you change character, right? So I think people, and I was still thinking politically, people on the left and the right have very different views of that, right? So sometimes people on the right, which is where I tended to be, want to pass laws, right? So we're just going to change it. And we're going to make it illegal. Well, okay. People on the other side of the aisle would be like, let's just tell a few stories, right? Let's make some movies. Let's make some TV shows. And it turns out to be very, very successful. So I realized, how do you change character? Well, actually, you tell stories. And this is actually how societies have changed character and shaped character of their people forever. This is why we have things like the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? For Israel, what was that? That was a recalling of stories about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in their thing, right? The reason that they celebrate Passover is because that's telling the story again of how God delivered the people. We have our own in Christmas and Easter and whatnot. So stories are really, really powerful. So the reason I chose to do that is partly because I was a bad preacher, and partly because I just wanted to let the stories speak for themselves and let people make their own conclusions. This is one thing that really is kind of one of the main things in my heart about this. You have to trust. Podcasting is an art, right? And in art, you have to trust your audience to be able to get the meaning. So you don't always have to make it explicit. If you're an evangelist, maybe you're called to do that, right? So I'm not going to tell you not to. I just know that's not where I need to be. But you don't always have to make it plain, right? Sometimes you have to plant the seeds, plant that little bit of, oh, this is a thing in somebody's heart, and let the Holy Spirit take it from there and see what happens. It's not all up to us. So anyway, that was a whole process for me to kind of get through, and it took a couple of years, but that's how I ended up in a story podcast.
So since you're kind of in this story world, and some people listening to this or watching this may be soaked in the social media world, which is a little more bite-sized than most podcasts are. Why do you think that longer form podcast style is still useful and still effective?
Oh yeah. Well, I think people like it, right? I think people will listen. This is the thing. Everybody thinks that bite size or that people's attention spans are getting shorter. But you know what? The most popular podcasts in the world are 2 and 3 hours, right? Because they're listening to it while they're doing other things. So just like me sitting in my cubicle at bank jail, listening to podcasts 40 hours a week because it entertain me. Most people are doing that. So I don't think that really is the deal. I think people want more content. In fact, I don't even like I know some people do this. Don't tell anybody I said this, but I'm not a huge fan of like shorter shows, right? If you're telling me, oh, I'm going to do 10 or 15 minutes, okay. That doesn't interest me, right? I want the stuff. I think I want substance. I want something that's gonna be there. But other people do. So, and I know like Jerry Dugan has Jerry's sort of anyway. He's got Jerry Shorts, which is funny. He's kind of a play on his height, but he does that in his episode, between his episodes, and it really works for him. So there's a place for that. You really have to figure out. This is the answer for everything. What does your audience want? What do they need? So you got to figure that out, and that's what I would recommend. But man, I like the long stuff. I want to get into it. Look at the diamond from every facet, and let's think about it. That's me though.
Well, when you're thinking about a podcast, and let's say you're starting to create a podcast, how do you get the word out? How do you find the listeners to bring them in to bother to listen the first time?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a few things you have to do. You need to be where your listeners are. So that's maybe where social media comes in, right? Mm-hmm. So I have a 5-part thing for that marketing kind of template. I think, first of all, email is really important. So if you don't have an email list as a podcaster, that's the first thing I'm going to tell you to do. Get an email list, collect emails, create some sort of really easy lead magnet download that you can give away. So somebody was telling me this week about theirs that was like 10 scripture passages about to help you be a better dad or something like that, right? So like, okay, fine. And it's just 2 or 3 pages. It's just the passages. It's just enough to get you thinking. That's it. And it's enough to get an email. So you need an email. And then every time you publish an episode, you're going to email that list, right? Mm-hmm. Social media is another thing. Hang out where your audience is most. So if they're trying to reach young people, don't post on Facebook and think you're going to do it. You got to be on TikTok, right? That's just the way it's going to be. It's life right now. Yep. So that's just, you got to do that. What else? So then so social media, so hang out there wherever your people are, respond to comments. Michael Hyatt, by the way, and his book Platform had a really good approach to Twitter. At the time he wrote, Twitter was the big deal, right? But it works for everything. Show up, set yourself a schedule for 20 minutes every day to just show up on Twitter, interact with some conversations, and post your stuff. So your thoughts as well. 20 minutes a day really is all you need. Like if you do that, you'll start to see results in a few weeks. Okay. So email, social media. I think having great guests is really valuable as well. So getting people on your show that your audience wants to hear from, that you can borrow if they already have an audience, and you can borrow their audience for an episode. Some of those people will stick around and listen to more of your episodes if they like it. So having great guests is great. I mentioned already getting books from publishers. Never pay for a book again. Start a podcast, never pay for a book again. It's great. I ask for books. I got one this week that I had asked I had asked to have the author a couple years ago. Well, it wasn't the right time. I got her coming up next week and reached out to the publisher. They sent me the book for free, right? That's fantastic. So that's another little aside there. Then you got to be a guest, which is what we're here doing, right? So like you show up on shows, try to get on shows where the audience overlaps with yours. And I would say even go widely, right? So go to other shows where the audience doesn't always overlap with yours. That's okay, because some of those people will want to hear more from you and they'll check out your show. Finally, I think you got to start a community. So community, if you're bringing in people who resonate with your message, with your topic, and with the struggle and the problem that you're solving, definitely bring them together, because I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is they're going to serve each other, and then you're the one who's facilitating that, and that is really, really valuable. And I also think you then don't have to be at the center of the attention, right? So you can actually make it more about them, but then you also have them in a place where you can reach them, right? So that's also helpful.
Now, are you taking your podcast? And I guess actually before I ask that, how do you feel about using because podcast is traditionally audio, but like you and I are recording video. And are you using both of those mediums for your podcast? Is that something you feel like is effective? What are your thoughts about that?
So many. I have so many thoughts. So it depends on your level of skill, right? So I would say, can you do a video podcast? Can you record it and put it on YouTube? Yeah, you can. Maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't. So the best example I've seen actually is Tim Winders again. He recorded every video of every single podcast he did, but it wasn't until like his 100th episode, I think, that he started to do YouTube and he started to put them out onto YouTube. So, and I think that was partly because like it's just a different skill, right? It's just a different thing. So depends on where your level of skill is. If I'm an audio guy, so I really prefer audio, and that's what I do. Halfway there, I don't record video at all. Christian podcaster, when I do an interview, I record video. Someday that'll end up on YouTube. It'll be a thing. So yeah, is it great? Is the good thing about YouTube is you can monetize eventually, right? So that's kind of cool. I know there's some requirements and things to that, but it's good. I just encourage podcasters take one thing at a time, learn one skill, and then do the next skill. And that's the way, because I don't want you to be overwhelmed. The last thing I want is for somebody to start a show and then get overwhelmed with all the work and not continue the show. So if it's too much work, don't do it.
And are you repurposing any of your content to use it in a different way or format?
I'm trying to. So I'm trying to start doing that because the aforementioned TikTok is like, I would really love to have videos like this where I can put it onto TikTok and go, hey, this is something, whatever. This is 60 seconds of something that was great in this episode. I don't know how well those perform always, but yeah, I think it's a great idea if you can figure it out. So there are AI tools now that you can use that will do some of this for you. That'll cut things up. Which is great. So take advantage of it. But again, if you can't do it all, don't worry about that. Yeah, just get the content produced. That's the first place to start.
So you're speaking to a group of people who are curious about social media or just getting started in social media or looking to expand their media functions, their abilities. Why should they consider podcasting first? And what do you think is the highest and best use for that kind of content, that podcasting content?
Yeah. Well, so one good thing about podcasting, particularly if you're creating content regularly, say every week, is it does give you the opportunity to create something that you can use across a whole bunch of different kinds of media, right? So you have the audio that goes out in your RSS feed as a podcast. If you record the video, you can cut that up into clips, which would be good. But there's one thing that I do that, like I grab quotes out of every single episode that I do that can become quote cards, right? That you can post on Instagram or on other places. I write a paragraph about the episode, right? And that goes into my thing. So then I have something else to share. So I think podcasting can be really versatile. You're creating a lot there that you can share. You can do the, audiograms. A lot of people like to do those as well. So things like that. So there's a lot you can do with it that makes it really versatile. And I think that's kind of underappreciated. I think we make content creation too hard sometimes, right? It's actually way easier than we think.
Now, you mentioned audiograms. For those who might not be familiar with that term, I know what you're talking about. But for those who aren't familiar with that term, what are we talking about?
Yeah, so an audiogram is like a static picture with audio placed over it so that it looks like a video and it's playing video, I guess. It's playing audio over top of a picture or maybe a video or something so it looks cool and gives people a taste of the show.
What else would you want an aspiring podcaster to know?
Yeah. I think I would definitely start with your mindset, like we said. And then I would say, nail down your message, figure out your message. Now, this can always be adjusted as you go, But if you can put it in terms of who you help, what you help them do, and the transformation they're going to get because they listen to your show, right? That will do a lot for you. And then you can add underneath that the ways that you help them do those things and find that transformation. That figuring out your message like that, I think, is one of the key components, because you're going to attract the right people through your podcast. It takes a little bit of effort. You have to be specific. A lot of us want to use very non-specific, generic, I'll say Christianese sometimes words, right? You know what I mean? So those things are delightful, but they do not say much, right? And so they're not specific. You gotta get really specific, more specific than you think you need to be, and then you'll probably tweak it even a little bit more. But if you get there, then that can help you a lot, and it makes all the other work worth it.
And any encouragement out there to those who are thinking about doing it?
Do it. Get started. So it took me 2 years to start my podcast, and that was like a year and a half too long. So you should just get started. Don't be afraid of it. Your first, 50 episodes might not be as good as you would like them to be. You might not be as practiced on the mic as you would like to be. But you're going to get better at it. And you just have to do it. Just show up, do the episodes, put in the reps, have that growth mindset, and get started. You should start sooner than later.
You said, to keep with it, to say you're going to do this, you're going to commit to it. If someone's looking at podcasting, how long should they commit to before they decide, yes, I'm going to do this? Is there like, if you're not going to do it for a certain amount of time, it's probably not something you should dive into?
I encourage people to start in podcast for a year. Commit yourself to publishing an episode every week for 1 year and see what that's like. Because I think that's long enough. You're going to get your rhythm down. You're going to get the process down to the point where you can do it pretty quickly, way more quickly than you do at first. And you'll start to be seeing some results, right? You'll start to see it develop there. And then after a year, you can ask yourself the question, how long do I want to keep doing this? Do I want to commit to another year? I think you should. About 2 years, there's kind of an inflection point about that episode 100. It seems like people start to take you a little more seriously. That was the case for me. I don't know if other people, I've heard of other people experiencing that, but I assume that's still true. And so maybe keep doing that. I did this for myself when my show was 5 years old, which now is 2 years ago. I asked myself the question, how long am I going to keep doing this? Right. And it was really kind of a prayer. It was a little conversation, me and God. And the answer was 10 years. I said, okay, great. So I'm halfway there. That was 2 years ago. So now we've got 7 years of halfway there. I'm going to have 10 years, 500 episodes of that show. And that's what me and the Lord have committed to. So that's kind of how I approach it myself.
Very cool. If somebody wanted to follow you or find out more about the Christian Podcasters Association, how do they keep up with you or get connected?
Yeah. 2 places I'll tell you to go. The best one is ChristianPodcastersAssociation.com. You can get on our mailing list, and I will keep you updated about all the things that we do. But for free, if you want to go to Facebook and just search Christian Podcasters Association, you'll find our Facebook group. That's totally free. You join it, get in there, you can connect, and you can post, hey, I'm new at this. I don't know what to do. And we have a ton of really helpful people who will answer your questions and do that. And you can also always message me, and I'm happy to hop on a call with you and help out.
Yeah, and I'm part of that group. It's a great group, definitely. Very helpful people.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it is good. And you're definitely one of those who can help out with all the stuff and the crazy, tech questions or whatever people have. And you're like, oh, this is how you fix that.
Well, Eric, it has been great having you today. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's been great to be here. Thanks a lot for having me.
Eric has become a great friend over the last couple of years, and I love hearing about his podcasting journey. If you want to keep up with Eric or find out more about the Christian Podcasters Association, check out the links down in the show notes below. Well, that's all I have for you today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, just click all those links, whatever they are down there, so you can keep up with us whenever we put out new content. You'll find all of our social links to our YouTube channel, and our online store at ChristianUrgeUnite.com. If you enjoy the show and want to help even more, consider becoming a partner on Patreon. We've changed all of our Patreon levels, and every level has great benefits and makes a huge difference in the kinds of ministries we're able to support. Supporters will also get to hear exclusive stories of believers who are serving around the world through our ministry partners. To check it out or partner with us, go to patreon.com/ChristianNerdsUnite or ChristianNerdsUnite.com and click on the support tab in the menu. And check out ChristianNerdHQ.com for more great podcasts just like this. Before you go, I do want to leave you with this blessing from Psalm 20. May the Lord answer you when you are in distress. May the name of the God of Jacob protect you. May he send you help from the sanctuary and grant you support from Zion. May he remember all your sacrifices and accept your burnt offerings. May he give you the desire of your heart and make all your plans succeed. May we shout for joy over your victory and lift up banners in the name of our God. We'll see you next week. Blessings.
Hey.